Welcome to this edition of Cardinal Clips, and we're going to talk to Todd, Lynum, and students who went to China in March and early April. Todd, could you tell us why it is that you think it's important that kids go to China?
It's a great question, and it can come up with many reasons. Primarily, of course, we want the kids to be able to see the country whose language and culture they've been studying in class. This gives a chance, just like the kids who go to Spain get to finally make the language real, whether it be in Spain or in China. And for me, it's the other thing that, the language and culture aside, just to experience something outside of the United States is just phenomenally educational. I told the kids several times through the trip, you will never be the same now. Your world will never be the same because of you've gone this far, you've seen something entirely different, and your way of thinking and looking at the world is going to be different from now. And I said that's a really good thing. So that's beginning of what I hope will be many experiences traveling and seeing other parts of the world and getting to understand other people.
As you look back on it, for you, what was the highlight of it? I know you've been to China 3 or 4 times, but what was the highlight with this trip? Because this was the first time you've taken kids to China.
Another great question, and it's so. If I had to put it down to one single thing, I would say the kids. Just being with that group of kids, I enjoyed everything we saw just as much, if not more, than they did. What we saw was wonderful. But to be able to share that with my students this time and to see their amazement and their wonder and their curiosity, but even more so, their respect. I've said this to everybody I've said. The highlight for me has been what was the respect and the dignity and the way our kids conducted themselves and represented their school, their community, and their country over there. I couldn't have been more proud. They were constantly interacting very well with the people of China. I think it's fair to say that any of the Chinese people who met our kids and had some interaction with them had a favorable impression of Americans.
No ugly American stuff this time?
Certainly not from our group. Not from our group.
Has China changed a little since your earlier trips?
By far more than a little. It's absolutely mind-boggling. My first experience in China was in the early 1980s. That's when they were just beginning to do some of their reforms, some of the economic reforms that have resulted in the China we hear about and see about today. To put it in perspective, I tell, for example, I told the kids on our trip, when I first went there, it was very rare to see cars on the street or to see people transporting in cars. Almost everything was either public buses or even much more so bicycles. This time, 2012, you hardly saw any bicycles. Almost all cars, many private cars. That was completely unheard of in the 1980s. Nobody had a private car. That wasn't even an option for the Chinese people. This is why we're paying $3 and some at the pump right now. We're in a global economy and competing globally. That's one thing, but also our kids alluded to earlier some of the buildings we were in, the 101-story building and so on. Nothing like that was one generation ago. Nothing like that existed in China. Now it's pretty much common, and the technology and the engineering. Just absolutely mind-boggling. And I guess I feel very fortunate that I got to see the China 30 years ago and the China today. I can see the contrast and the rapid, phenomenal development.
How many of our students went to China with you?
We had 17 kids go, and we thought that was a great number for our first trip. We thought it was a good number to have some critical mass, if you want to put it that way, but also a very manageable group for our first time. I was very comfortable being the adult leader to take that many kids and see how this goes. Next time, I certainly hope we have more, and I would feel that much more comfortable. But 17 very amazing, awesome kids.
Just out of curiosity, how many adults went also?
Including myself, there were 4. We had three parents came with, and they were also terrific and were very helpful and wonderful role models to the kids for wanting to experiment and trying to always understand. There was such a good atmosphere in our whole group, among the adults and the kids, of let's not judge, let's not criticize, let's try to understand. And the adults certainly modeled that, and the kids picked up on it. And that was our theme and our approach to pretty much everything we saw.
If I remember right, I think most of the cities that you went to were in large urban areas. How did our kids handle that?
Understandably, being from a town of 20,000 and being suddenly thrust into a city of 20 million is quite a cultural shift. They handled it well. Again, I think they handled it much more out of interest and curiosity. I think we'd probably all agree we're really glad that we live in Willmar, where traffic is far more manageable. The congestion and the pollution are nothing like we saw in those big cities.
What did you go there to see? There had to be some plan of attack when you left the U.S. that you were going to follow an itinerary. You want to share a little bit of that with us?
We went with an organized group. It's called the Education First Tours. They have been sponsoring tours around the world for many, many years. And we looked at them and picked out their particular itinerary, which I thought the kids would appreciate the most, which would give us of course, when you go to a country like China, as the United States, you can only see so much in a short amount of time. I thought this particular itinerary would give them a good taste of both the modern and the ancient sides of China. So therefore, we went to Beijing and saw the Great Wall. The kids will say more about that later. You can never overestimate how impactful that experience is. Saw the capital city, of course, Beijing, the Forbidden City, and gave them a good sense of ancient and a little bit more recent Chinese history. After that, we went to Xi'an. I was delighted to see that this package included going out to Xi'an, and that's where the famous terracotta soldiers are buried. And that was a wonderful experience. I saw it once, my first time in China, some 30 years ago, and I was absolutely thrilled to be able to see it again. You are looking at something that was underground for over 2,000 years, and it's absolutely mind-boggling what it took to produce that, and how it came about to be discovered fairly recently, just almost 40 years ago. I was delightful to that, just to see it myself, but also I thought this would really give the kids a flavor of not only what is modern China, the power and the strength that we see in modern China, but what was China 2,000 years ago, the development, the art, the engineering, the sophistication, even back then. And what does that mean throughout their history, and what's it going to say about them in the future? And finally, we ended in Shanghai, one of the biggest cities in China and one of the biggest cities in the world. And I thought that would be a good place to really see China at some of its most modern cutting edges. That's where we went to the building that's 101 stories tall, and you get to the top of that building in less than a minute on the elevators, and you don't even realize it. They also saw some good art productions there. We saw a wonderful acrobatic performance, went to a tea ceremony, and I just thought this whole package gave them, again, what I would really want them to get is a taste of the ancient and the modern of China, and I thought this provided that pretty well.
Did they get to meet any just normal Chinese that maybe visit their home, or did that happen?
As a matter of fact, that was also part of the itinerary. We had a meal prepared by a Chinese housewife in her home. This is that she contracts with the tour agency to provide this, and we actually went into a very typical Chinese home, had our meal there. I think that was not an experience that most tourists get. And again, our kids were very gracious and very grateful to our hostess and enjoyed the meal very well. So we did have that kind of experience. The kids will say more later about also being in a typical Chinese school. And what was that like, and how does that compare and contrast with our school, for example?
Now, do you want to go over to China and teach English to Chinese students coming here?
That I very much enjoy. I feel it's very important for Americans to understand China, but I can see the advantages. The school we went to, especially, those kids are highly driven, highly motivated. I think it's safe to say that when a Chinese teacher gives out homework, it's going to be done the next day, and no excuses. There's something envious about that. So,
no, my dog ate it, or anything like that.
Exactly, and Mom and Dad are going to be on top of that, making sure it's done too. So,
I know China has a one child per family law. Did you notice anybody with more than one child, or was it just kind of one kid?
I think we did notice a few instances of that. Again, in our short amount of time, what I would like to do the next time, or what I hope the kids will be able to do, is get more into the culture and get to know people on a more personal basis, and then learn more about that. You're absolutely right about the one-child policy. That's still pretty much the norm. There are some exceptions to it, but there's all kinds of reasons for that. But that's still pretty much the policy. And, well, when you get over to China, you can see with the crowded and the congestion and so on, why perhaps you have a better understanding for the reasons for that policy and why it has to be that way.
More boys than girls in China? Did you know? I mean, because I understand that the male child is, well, I don't know, has a better future than female children. Maybe you didn't even pick up on that. I don't know.
Yeah. No, you're right. We've all heard scenarios about that sort of thing. I don't know if we were really able to make any good judgments about that, but it is an interesting social question that's going on over there. There's no doubt.
Were you able to go have a little free time and just kind of wander around? Now, I don't know how much I'd want to wander around a city of 25 million, but who knows? Were you able to do a little bit of that and kind of stick your nose into the culture and kind of see what it was like?
I felt we were, and that's a good question for the kids also, but certainly as the leader, I felt a great deal of responsibility for their safety, but I also wanted to give them some flexibility and some time to, I didn't want them tied to me the whole time. I wanted them to get out and explore. And I felt comfortable with that because really, yes, we're in cities of over 20 million people. However, it's very safe. The crime rate is very low. Certainly you want to use common sense anywhere you go. But I think our kids would attest to the fact that the Chinese people they met were friendly, polite, wanted to be helpful. I didn't think there was too much to be worried about for their safety and so on. We wanted to use common sense, but the answer to your question is yes, they did have some of those experiences, and some of them were just terrific. And getting out and especially when it was out shopping, doing the bargaining, which is very common in China. Many markets where you can bargain down a price. You start out very high. You see how far down you can get them, and they got into that and had some very great experiences using the free market at its purest form. So,
when you walk away at the end of the day and you say, geez, I hope they learned this, what would you say you wanted them to know at the end of the trip?
With this group of kids, I think they accomplished it, and when I was going over there, I wasn't always sure what that might be, but they brought it out for themselves, and I could see that the learning that I wasn't even sure was going to happen happened, and by that I mean they came back with a much greater appreciation of both China and their own home country, and that's a valuable lesson. I think they have an appreciation for the power and the greatness of China, but also a great appreciation for its problems, which they could see. I think they brought back then a much greater appreciation for the kind of life they can have here, the freedoms that they have, the opportunities they have here. And I would like to think that will motivate them, that type of gratitude and experience motivates them to make even better use, be good stewards and citizens, both of their own country and of the world.
Todd, thanks for taking the time to sit down with us, and I'm looking forward to talking to students about their trip. I'm jealous, kind of, but I'm glad you had a great trip.
Well, thank you for this opportunity to talk about our experience, and I wish for you and for everybody in the district a chance to go over and see China. I think you'll find it phenomenal.